In this episode with my guest, Don Moxley from Modem Method, we talk about heart rate variability and how it relates to human performance. Now, I've been doing a lot of studying with heart rate variability, HRV, using my Whoop device, but I still couldn't grasp exactly what it is, how to get better at it, and what it really means to longevity as well as sports performance. And in this episode, Don Moxley goes into depth with this subject. So if you're interested, stay tuned. How's it going? This is Brad Williams with Over 40 Fitness Hacks, the podcast where I help you, being over 40, to fight the aging process without giving up your social life. I've been a personal trainer and gym owner for over 14 years, and I specialize in helping the over 40 crowd get to their goal. If you need a little bit of guidance, check out my show notes. I have a link to schedule a free 15-minute Zoom call, and you can ask all the questions you want. But enough of that. Let's get on with the episode.
When I was at Ohio State 13 through 2018, I went back to Ohio State as a sports scientist and was working with the team there. We won a national title in 15. But one of the things that I specialized in was understanding a thing called heart rate variability.
Yeah.
And this is a measurement of your stress response. And by the time I left in 2018, we were measuring 3.5 million data points on a wrestling team each season. It was so cool.
Wow.
And it got to the point to where I could use HRV to diagnose problems that athletes were struggling with. We could use it for prescription. Or what are you ready for today? We could measure that. And then finally, in 2018, we qualified our whole starting lineup for the national tournament, first time in school history. We had 8 All-Americans, most in school history. The 2 guys that would not make All-American, I knew the first day based on HRV status. And again, ever since then, we just keep learning. If I could turn the clock back and work with those 2 guys differently, I would. I would have changed the education program. I would have changed some things. But you know what? You don't see it until you see it for the first time. And so we kept moving. That's been what's been really interesting is our ability to really get a hold of individual responses. As a wrestler, I'm a bit of a contrarian to begin with. That's just my nature. And I was not comfortable taking the generalized advice. Okay, I finished up my career. I was 6 feet tall. I walked on the mat at about 295 pounds. That fall, I guess I should, before season, I had squatted 850 for a double. And the next day I had benched 480 for a double. I was crazy strong. I mean, not compared to Westside Barbell strong, but crazy strong for a college athlete. And my teammates were all different. And you know what? I had a teammate by the name of Ed Podekar. I think he was a 3-time high school state champion, a 3-time All-American at Ohio State. Ed was a big, tall, gangly, strong guy. He would throw the legs in and just rip you to shreds. It was amazing. That wasn't my game, okay? I had a different game. I had to train differently for my game than what Ed had to do versus Dane Tussle, our 118-pounder. Whether you're Dane Tussle cutting from 130 to 118, or you're Don Moxley stepping onto the mat 295, there's different stimuli, there's different feedback. We're going to respond differently. And this is what we've learned over time. And again, what makes me so excited about the time we live in. Again, wearable tech, not all of it's great. I think most of it's good. And you start working your way through this. And as you start to take the feedback that these devices are providing, it gives you a much better sense of what you can do day to day, week to week, year to year.
Yeah, I'm barely getting into that realm right now. That was going to be our next topic anyways, HRV, and love to hear your thoughts on that, because for me, it's a brand new term. I've never heard of it. And I'm seeing my stats on my trackers, and I don't understand why it's going up, why it's going down. Certain stimuli that I notice, not just sleep. Obviously, alcohol, I understand. Okay, that's going to drop my HRV score a little bit. But I've had melatonin drop it down. I've had CBD drop it down. It's like, God, I can't do anything or I get like a horrible score. So can you educate our audience on just like some simple stuff first, and then we can get into more advanced?
Yeah. First of all, very multi-faceted, and your nervous system coming into this also can be very different. And we should spend some time talking about the concept of trauma.
Okay.
And how that modifies your central nervous system. But yeah, I think the important point is there's key drivers to improving HRV. And so before we go very far, let's just talk about why HRV is important.
Okay.
We know right before you die, your HRV is going to be 0. Okay. We'll talk more about what HRV is, but that score is going to be 0. If you have a pacemaker installed and you have a cardiac event and you go to the ER, the first thing they interrogate is that cardiac device, and they interrogate it for HRV status. The lower it is, you see where it's at.
Okay.
Now, my Olympians and my elite athletes have HRV scores in the hundreds, okay? 150, 120. We're all in between those two numbers, right?
I'm way lower.
You always want to be working away from 0.
Yeah.
And we can talk about those scores. I get calls from a lot of people, hey, my HRV is 13 or my HRV is 20. And listen, going from 20 to 0, you've got to be really ill. And I know a ton of people in that range. I work with a lot of people in that range. But certainly, you want to be engaging in behaviors and engaging in practices that eventually move those numbers up.
What is the definition of HRV? It's heart rate variability, which means stress it's under, or?
Let's go back to the raw definition. The raw definition is the variability time between heartbeats.
Okay, there we go.
So if your resting heartbeat is 60 beats a minute, that means you expect to beat every second. But when you have high variability, instead it's beat, beat, beat.
Oh, and it averages to 60.
The average is 60, but the variability, and you got to measure 250 of those beats and get the difference in times. And that's when you can start to do the analysis on it. So now what makes the change? Well, your central nervous system, called your autonomic nervous system, the automat part of your nervous system. This is when you go to sleep at night, you don't have to think about breathing. Your autonomic system drives that. You don't need to tell your pancreas to create insulin. When you eat a carbohydrate, your autonomic system drives it. But if we're sitting and a bear walks through the door, then our autonomic system says, whoa, this is life-threatening. You need to get out of here. Here's a bunch of resources for you to get out of here. And you get adrenaline and you get cortisol. You get all those things that you need to escape the bear. Our challenge is we now live in a society when we have paper bears. We have IRS. We have job. We have that phone ding. Okay. Is that ding a fear response or is it a recovery response? Because the more we're in fight or flight, sympathetic side, the lower the HRV, the more we're in recovery, and the more resources we build, the higher the HRV. So when we start looking at HRV, I think there's 4 basic, I call it the rocks in the jar. The number 1, movement affects HRV more than anything. Okay. So exercise, organized movement done in a manner that provides you with a recovery stimulus, that's going to be a beneficial thing, right? Number 1. Number 2 is if you don't have appropriate nutrients in your body, if your food intake is not bringing in the appropriate nutrients, your body is going to stress. It's going to say, wait a minute, we need this and this. And it's going to create a stress response. It's going to cause you to go look for nutrient-dense food. Number 3, sleep. In the absence of sleep, you can't have good HRV. You have to fix sleep to get good HRV. And then finally, light. What we're finding is that the light that we get through our eyes and on our skin is very important. At a minimum, it's just in establishing circadian rhythm. But more importantly, getting out in the morning and getting these infrared light and sub-visible lights, which infrared or red light, these are very beneficial. Our body likes that. Our body takes in light through the skin and through our eyes and creates a response. Okay. So those are the 4 rocks. The number 1 driver in humans of poor HRV is inflammation. Okay.
Yep.
What do you do to fix inflammation? You exercise, you eat more omega-3s, you get good sleep, and you get light on your skin in the morning and the evening. So those are all things that will drive an improvement in HRV. Now, we talk about rocks in the jar. Let's talk about the jar. Jar is your purpose. Okay. We live in a society now where our environment is driving us away from movement. Okay. We're working here now. I used to have to work throwing hay bales. Throwing hay bales has a very beneficial health benefit, but I went to grad school, so I didn't have to do that for the rest of my life. Now we're sitting here doing what we do. We're not moving. Now, luckily, I got a good workout in right before our call. I finished morning, and we'll talk about some data there too. But I got my exercise in, the planned movement. We look at food. There are nutrients that we can take in to improve HRV status. We have a product called HRV Plus, Modern Method HRV Plus, which is a combination of cannabis hemp extracts. So there are molecules in cannabis that help HRV. There are molecules in cannabis that hurt HRV too.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is our product has omega-3 fish oil with anti-inflammatory properties. So we're lowering inflammation and we're improving the tone of our nervous system. So those are nutrients. We're bringing in nutrients that our body needs to regulate our central nervous system. When that is in control, our environment pulls us away from sleep. We have TVs. I used to pride myself because I never missed the Tonight Show. I thought it was great. I watched Tonight Show when Johnny Carson had it. But now that I understand HRV, listen, I'm in bed about 9 o'clock most night. I don't see late night TV anymore. And then finally, light, I make an effort to get light on my skin. I have red light panels. I invest in that technology to make sure I'm getting that kind of input that I need so that I'm able to fully realize recovery. Again, when you're getting fully recovered, why do I do it? What is the jar? The jar is purpose, the goal. Why do you wake up? Back when I was a college athlete, I had a goal that was performance related. I think of longevity in 3 thirds. You spend your first third learning, your second third earning service to others, and your third is your third, my third. My wife and I, our daughter moved out of our home. She played lacrosse at Ohio State, and she moved up to Chicago to coach lacrosse at Northwestern. And I looked at my wife and I said, we're done. I said, we're now in our third, and I want this to be rich.
Yeah. Well, and your main focus is undoing in that last third of your first 2 thirds.
Well, yeah, you know what? I have no regret.
Yeah.
I regret is a valueless emotion. I try to not even think about it. I like to keep my purpose on the horizon. My past informs, but my purpose is what drives me. And so when I'm looking at my purpose, I've coached amazing athletes. I've coached Olympians and pro athletes and just across the spectrum. My favorite coaching job was my daughter's 8th grade field hockey team. Okay. That was the most enjoyable coaching experience. I want to coach my grandkids. I'm looking forward to that. My nephew qualified for the Florida State High School Wrestling Tournament 6 years ago. So at that time, I was 56, 57 years old, and I was in good enough shape that I could go work out. And he's a big kid. He wound up playing Division I football. He was a center in Division I, big kid. So we were similar. The first day, I still had some skills. I could take him. The second day, I was a mess. No recovery. But I want to be that 80-year-old freak that's in the weight room, in the wrestling room, still teaching kids to say, can you believe this guy? That's my purpose. That's what's out there. And I don't want to end my life in a hospital hooked to tubes. Okay. Our challenge when we move away from athletics to end of life, right now, the average American's lifespan is 73 years old. On the average American's health span, this is when morbidity starts to come in, when they start to interact with the hospital system, is 62. Okay. We have 11 years where hospital groups are basically putting vacuum cleaners into our bank account and sucking up everything we worked for. Okay. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in compressing morbidity into mortality. I'm hoping that I tell people, I hope that I'm hiking the edge of the Grand Canyon and I slip and I can enjoy the ride down. And those are my last breaths. I'm fine with that. But I want to be able to hike the Grand Canyon the day before. I want to be able to do that. So it's that purpose, it's what are you working for winds up being a critical driver because our environment is pushing back on us so hard. And that's part of our challenge.
Yeah. So going back to HRV, now in my mind, I got a better understanding of it. And it sounds like stressors are good as long as there's recovery for those. And that kind of increases nutrition because that affects your HRV score. And we all know that affects our daily lives as well. And then one more thing is trauma, bad. There is no recovery from trauma. So the
trauma affects you. Okay. That's what's critical about that is that, Brad, if you're born in a rattlesnake pit, the only way you survive is through hypervigilant. Okay. That's part of it. And there's been some really interesting studies done in dogs and mice. And if you fear condition a dog or a mouse, They put them in a cage and they shock them and they become what's called fear conditioned. And then on autopsy, they look, part of your brain that detects fear is called the amygdala. The amygdala in your brain is fear sensing part of your brain. And what we know in dogs and mice is that there's a drop of a chemical in the amygdala that's called an anandamide, and called the Zen molecule. It's called an endocannabinoid. It's a cannabinoid that your body produces. By the way, your body produces it when you exercise and move. Okay. Why does exercise make you feel better? It's not dopamine and serotonin. Okay. And that's where the runner's high comes from. These kinds of things. But what we know is there's a drop of anandamide in the amygdala in fear conditioned animals. And it makes sense to think that it happens in humans too. You just can't do that study. We don't respond well to autopsy. But why do people who have been traumatized like cannabis? Well, we're artificially boosting the endocannabinoid in our system so that we achieve a non-vigilant status. I don't think you're old enough to really remember Vietnam. I was alive back then, and Vietnam's the closest thing to a snake pit we have. We took kids from the United States, we dropped them into Vietnam, into the snake pit. If they got back, they were traumatized. There was huge trauma, okay? Vietnam vets like smoking pot, okay? Now, pot's changed a lot since the 70s, but they liked it because it lowers the vigilance, okay? It helps them be normal. This is where the benefit comes in. So now we traumatize differently. We traumatize sexually. We traumatize with poverty. We traumatize. Listen, there's an argument to be made that kids and cell phones are experiencing a trauma response.
Social media, people are addicted to that. That's trauma.
Absolutely. So now, does trauma define you? Doesn't have to, but you have to recognize that it affects you. Okay. You have to recognize that it's there. And there are multiple practices that we can engage in, not just exercise, meditation. To put it in context, when we were measuring HRV with my wrestling team, we were working with the Air Force Research Lab at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which was also working with the elite warrior groups, the Navy SEALs and Army Delta Force and these groups. So the SEALs were using sensory deprivation float tanks, and they were seeing a very positive response to HV in these groups. So my last year there, we floated my team 140 times. Okay. We went ham on that. It works. Okay. Wow. Meditation works. Floating is just an intense meditative environment. There's lots of great technologies that you can add. A lot of the wearable devices are building them in now. Your Apple Watch has got an interesting little meditative timer that puts in a breathing coach. These are all things that you can use to create parasympathetic response. If you're putting on top of that the nutritional and the exercise that you need, that you can move HRV with.